In 1929, the theosophist John W. Lavelle recalled visiting Emma Hardinge Britten in the months just before she published Art Magic.
As she told me her story, she was born into a very conservative family and, much to their distress, at quite an early age developed psychic powers. Amongst others, the power of leaving her physical body and bringing back recollection of what happened when out of it. For a time, she was used as a messenger by a group of Rosicrucians, of which Lord Lytton, then Sir Edward Bulwer, was a member. It was from what he then learned that he wrote his great books, Zanoni and A Strange Story.
Edward Buller-Lytton was a best-selling novelist and a prominent politician, serving for a while as Secretary of State to the United Kingdom's colonies. He's credited with coining several phrases still popular today, including the Gothic opening line, "It was a dark and stormy night."
Ooh.
The occultist, "The dweller on the threshold."
Ooh.
And my personal favorite, "The great unwashed."
That's me.
Ooh.
That
That is
is
a good
you.
one. Oh.
Sorry.
In his career, he wrote 3 occult novels, the first of which, Zanoni, established the genre, which would later be replicated by Pascal Beverly Randolph in his book Ravalette, and even suggest the structure of the Chevalier's so-called memoir, Ghostland. Zanoni was published as a novel in 1842. The introduction tells the story of how Bulwer-Lytton made friends with a mysterious Rosicrucian brother in an occult bookshop in Covent Garden, and that the Rosicrucian later left Bulwer-Lytton a collection of manuscripts after his death. The novelist had to first translate the manuscripts from a cipher and then edit them into shape for a reading public, and the book Zanoni is presented as the product of these labors. The book's mysterious authorship immediately reminds us of the secret Chevalier. Is it possible that Emma Hardinge Britten took the idea for a hidden writer from her old occult contact in the mother country? The Rosicrucian and the story he told of the adept Zanoni were clearly made up, the invention of a clever writer's active imagination. Could the Chevalier have been the same sort of clever invention, created by Emma Hardinge Britten to share a tale of occult belief and adventure she was afraid to ascribe to herself? Well, we're about to find out. My name's Rob Thompson. I am the Supreme Hierophant of the Secret, I always forget my title, Secret Order of Alchemical Actors. Here is Olivia.
Hey.
Olivia Littoral is, what you are
I think I'm a grandmaster.
You are the Grandmaster. Yeah, I
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
took your title.
Which is weird, because I think mine is
downgrade.
below yours, right?
Snatch that title.
I like that idea.
Never mind, they're even. We're even. We're equals.
Joining us in our discussion today, James is back.
Hello, everyone.
We've got Jacob in the mix, as is fairly customary at this point.
Always here.
Always
I
here.
like to think of myself as a parasite when it comes to things. I just include myself.
When it comes to
gonna
podcasts,
You ever go home?
Everything. I just show up and I'm just there.
I was going to say loyal, but, you know, okay.
and Morgan Chung is also sitting at the table with us.
Hello.
All right, let us begin the story of Emma Hardinge Britten, the last chapter of our series on the American occult. We, the members of the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors,
do solemnly commit ourselves to a full and honest telling of the history of the occult as far as we know it.
The story of Zanoni begins with Viola, the only daughter of an Italian violinist and composer possessed of an ethereal musical talent.
I hate that.
That her name is Viola?
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna name my son Trumpet.
Viola!
Only if you're a trombone player.
Viola performed the lead role in her father's first opera and nearly faltered in the face of his first audience at her first performance.
Classic.
Except that one mysterious man in the midst of that audience sent an almost otherworldly kind of encouragement to her over the heads of her hostile spectators. Both father and daughter rocketed to instant stardom, and she learned that the dark, encouraging stranger was a mysterious nobleman named Zanoni.
I keep thinking you say Zamboni every single time.
Viola fell in love with Zanoni, but for secret occult reasons, he was reluctant to return her affection and attempted to partner her up with an English gentleman named Glyndon.
Ew.
Glyndon was deeply you just automatically assume he is not a good-looking man.
No. His name
With a
is
name like
Glyndon.
Glyndon?
Glyndon was deeply infatuated with the beautiful Viola, but so was an evil prince. Buller-Lytton never named this prince, a
What?
clever trick suggesting an effort on the part of the author to shield himself from charges of slander. Makes us feel like the prince must have been a real guy, right? If we're not using his real name.
That's juicy.
He plotted to abduct and rape Viola, but his designs were foiled when Zamboni, perceiving the future, using his occult senses, sent Glyndon and his friends to disrupt the kidnapping. Glyndon asked Zanoni why he had taken the trouble to assist him, giving Zanoni the opportunity to clear up his occult affiliation with the reader.
You ask me why I have shown this interest in your fate. There is one reason which I have not yet told you. There is a fraternity as to whose laws and whose mysteries the most inquisitive schoolmen are in the dark. By those laws, all are pledged to warn, to aid, and to guide, even the remotest descendants of men who have toiled, though vainly, like your ancestor, in the mysteries of the order.
Glyndon, learning of Zanoni's occult order, got super jazzed at the prospect of being an occultist.
Super jazzed.
Right?
Did you write super jazzed?
I wrote super jazzed.
I love it.
So he chose to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and join, committing himself to the quest for the elixir of life. Pretty much the key to being a member of Zanoni's inner circle, which was pretty much just Zanoni and one other guy.
That's how I like it.
But Glyndon's ancestor,
That sounded weird.
his like great uncle or something, had been in that circle too. But
Oh.
then he died, so he failed at living forever. But now Glyndon is going to get a chance to play as well, to be in the secret circle. But here's the trade-off. Glyndon can no longer pursue Viola because to become a true occultist, he must relinquish all earthly attachments and desires.
That seems extreme.
And the sexy and talented Viola is most definitely an earthly attachment.
Don't talk
That's
about
one
her
way you
like
could
that.
put it. Yeah.
She's not just a piece
Viola,
of meat.
or at least she appeals to his earthly attachments.
She can sing, right? She's talented.
She's
got
more
more to
than
offer.
just, a
I
pretty
just want to
face.
clarify.
Viola doesn't care because she loves Zanoni better than Glyndon anyway. So, whatever, Glyndon. Go for it. Zanoni learned that the prince was super persistent and plotting to abduct Viola yet again. So Zanoni went to save her because Glyndon had given up on her to go be an occult master. The prince's men were closing in, but Viola refused to go with Zanoni until he pledged his love to her.
You know.
The prince's men were getting closer. Zanoni hesitated. Then at last he relented and confessed that he did truly love and wish to marry her. But by the time he confessed, it was too late. The prince's soldiers arrived and carried Viola off. The prince, in super classic James Bond villain style, invited Zanoni to a big banquet to gloat about how he was going to defile Zanoni's girlfriend.
I'd probably do the same thing.
While he was there, the prince tried to poison Zanoni, but Zanoni was poison-proof because he's an occult master.
Because the cult.
He's a superhero, yeah.
Seems like,
And in a fantastic counter-strike, he didn't kill the prince, but he started a fight between the prince and another guy at the prince's banquet, and that guy killed him, running him through with a sword.
That's like perfect scenario.
Yeah, that's... Viola and Zanoni have moved into a little cabana now on the fringes of the Mediterranean village.
Ooh.
Also kind of James Bondy, to have lots and lots of sexy times. They're briefly threatened by some roving pirates, but Zanoni kills them.
Brace yourself, pirate
It's
scum!
no use fighting. I'm going to take your booty.
My booty is just mine and mine alone.
Ah! Ah!
On guard!
Unguard yourself! Oh! Oh! You have bested me. Oh no! Ah! Ow!
Zanoni is trying to figure out how to make Viola live forever just like him. The trouble is, her love keeps her bound to Earth, and she has no interest in Zanoni's elixir of life. So he calls on his guardian spirit, Adonai, to help him.
When two souls are divided, knowest thou not that a third, in which both meet and live, is the link between them?
Adonai suggests that he should have a child with her and elevate both mother and child through each other to a desire for the elixir of life. Zanoni feels powerful forces threatening his wife and child and goes away to consult his only occult brother, Mage Noor, on the subject. Glyndon takes advantage of Zanoni's absence to visit Viola and tell her Zanoni is a devil worshipper.
You have heard of the old stories of men who have leagued themselves with devils for the attainment of preternatural powers. Those stories are not fables. Such men live. Their delight is to increase the unhallowed circle of wretches like themselves.
Glyndon, who had a really terrible time trying to become an occult adept and ended up being haunted by the spirit of death itself.
That's a big mistake.
Big mistake. He warned Viola that both Zanoni and Mage Noor trafficked with devils. He brought Viola with him to revolutionary France, because that's where you go, right, when you're trying to escape.
When death is stalking
Death,
you.
yeah.
That's what I would do.
And Zanoni's enemies conspired to have Viola imprisoned by Robespierre and guillotined to death, which pretty easy to do
So I want to go.
during the Terror. Buller-Lytton incorporates the French Revolution to represent the dangers of an atheistic dictatorship masquerading as a republic, which, point well taken, Sir Edward. Am I right, Soviet Union? Democratic People's Republic of China?
Oh, yep.
North Korea?
I speak for those guys.
But at the last minute, Zanoni intervenes and sacrifices himself instead, plotting to stand in for them on the scaffold. This may sound familiar. This was a plot point that Charles Dickens borrowed for Tale of Two Cities.
I was...
Spoiler alert. Delayed spoiler alert. Zanoni's willingness to die comes as a revelation. The dark dweller who has been taunting Zanoni with fear of death is dispelled, and Adonai returns.
Thy courage has restored thy power. Once more in the haunts of the earth thy soul charms me to thy side. Wiser now, in the moment when thou comprehendest death, than when thy unfettered spirit learned the solemn mystery of life.
All right, so if Zanoni's the first occult novel, well, what do you think makes for an occult novel? Ghostland is also an example, right?
There's a lot of occult
Well, it's a-
tendencies
a
in
novel
there.
about occult stuff, yes.
Yeah, but it's not just a novel that's mixed in occult things. It's where the path to becoming an occultist is a central feature of the plot.
Yes.
So, like,
What-
putting off love and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was about to say the fact that he takes certain steps that would be like to get there. Does that, I don't know how to make sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, like romantic comedy is about a boy and a girl and how they get together, right? So, James, what would you say an occult novel is about?
Well, in this case, the obstacle between the girl and the boy is that the boy is in the occult and cannot actually be in a relationship because of the nature of the occult. It's a plot point, a really big one.
Yeah, and he has to have a sort of spiritual revelation to move things forward.
Yes.
And it's about that spiritual revelation, really. It's not about the relationship even. The relationship is part of it, but the more important thing is the spiritual revelation that makes everything okay. Because he doesn't get together with the girl at the end. He dies on the scaffold.
It's like
not
really...
about him falling in love with the girl so much as him falling in love with the occult.
And moving, and yeah, elevating his spirit, right?
Yes.
Embracing death.
So it's like a rom-com.
It's like a really long ritual. kind
Yeah,
of.
it is, yeah. So Britten knew Bulwer-Lytton because she served as a clairvoyant in the secret Orphic Circle, of which he was a member, if not a leading member. Occultism historian Jocelyn Godwin argues that there is clear evidence Bulwer-Lytton was a player on the British occult scene in the early to mid-19th century. There wasn't much in Zanoni that he couldn't have learned secondhand, but there's plenty of evidence that Bulwer-Lytton had first-hand knowledge of occult secrets. His grandfather's library contained books on practical occultism, for example, and he studied with a man named Chauncey Hare Townsend, who was both a reverend at his preparatory school and a mesmerist.
Oh.
According to Godwin, Bulwer-Lytton investigated a woman named Mrs. Hayden, the very first American spiritualist medium to visit England, and he concluded that the phenomena she produced were genuine, but Sir Edward wouldn't commit to the notion that they were definitively produced by the spirits of the dead. Rather, he suggested, they might just as easily be explained as elementaries or unknown powers of the mind.
Damn it, are we going back to elementaries? Oh.
Yeah, in a way, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, that That matches.
Yeah, he's bringing up elementaries as an alternative. This is something spiritualists never considered, but Buller-Lytton's having these ideas as far back as the 1830s and 40s, and probably all of the secret British occultists and European occultists are thinking in terms of elementaries, not spirits of the dead. A series of eerily suggestive coincidences pop up when we read Ghostland and Zanoni together. In the first place, as I mentioned in the opening, both books are written by hidden authors. For Buller-Lytton, it's the unnamed Rosicrucian who bequeaths the manuscript for Zanoni to him, which is written in a cipher that he has to translate. For Emma Hardinge Britten, it's the incognito Chevalier, whose work is written in German and also has to be translated and compiled. Buller-Lytton employs other tricks to blur the boundary between fiction and reality. He holds back the name of his evil prince, which suggests there's a real person there. He uses ellipses to skip over information when the occult secrets seem to run too deep.
Ooh.
He includes real historical figures like Maximilien Robespierre, who was an actual guy during the Reign of Terror in France, and other French revolutionaries, and roots the story in actual history. He even cites footnoted sources for some of Zanoni's theories about medical herbs. Knowing the relationship between Buller-Lytton and Britten, Emma Hardinge Britten, I can't help but wonder if Emma herself, a stage actress with a talent for music, who hoped to be an opera singer in her early career, might have been the inspiration for Viola.
Well, they could have changed her name still.
To Emma.
Yep.
But for all these clever devices, Zanoni is simply too much to be believed. That an ancient Chaldean, which is what Zanoni was meant to have been, from Chaldea, one of the ancient cultures of the world, could have lived 1,000 years. He was supposed to have survived 1,000 years using his elixir of life and sacrificed himself in a complex bit of political maneuvering to not only take his wife's place on the scaffold, but it actually conspired to end the Reign of Terror in France. This is a detail we didn't get on our synopsis, but it's just too fantastic to be believed, right? That these things really happened. He didn't sell this book as a memoir. He sold this book as a novel. But the same can't be said for Ghostland, can it?
No.
Britten professes over and over again that this book, The Chevalier's life story, is the absolute truth. From the very beginning in Germany with Professor von Marx, to his days in the Elora Caves with the Indian Brotherhoods, to Helene Laval and Paul Perrault in The Maiming for Life. But it also looks as if Britten has borrowed plot points from Buller-Lytton when writing her narrative. The Chevalier doubts the existence of his immortal soul and must come to believe that the spirit can transcend death, a quest that takes the entirety of his story. Zanoni has lived 1,000 years in fear of death and finally overcomes that fear before replacing his wife under the guillotine's blade. The hero, an occult adept, is caught in a love triangle, culminating in the attempted defiling of his beloved, through rape in Zanoni and scandal in Ghostland, which is undone in both cases with a promise of marriage by the hero. Dark spirits in the form of elementaries in Ghostland and the Dweller in Zanoni haunt our hero and must be dispelled again and again to put the world right. We didn't give the Dweller much time in the synopsis, but it's worth taking a minute for the Dweller here. The Dweller is featured primarily in Glyndon's subplot after he gives up Viola to join Zanoni's Brotherhood. In a remote castle, Glyndon reads through a cipher the secrets of the immortal elixir.
When then the pupil is thus initiated and prepared, let him open the casement, light the lamps, and bathe his temples with the elixir. He must beware how he presumes yet to quaff the volatile and fiery spirit. To taste till repeated inhalations have accustomed the frame gradually to the ecstatic liquid is to know not life, but death.
Impatient to know the mysteries of eternal life, Glyndon performs the ritual without the necessary preparation, lights the lamps, and washes his temples. A dense smoke gathers and forms shape, which Glyndon identifies as unfamiliar ghosts. He hails them, but they don't respond. A new spirit arrives, the Dweller of the Threshold.
It was as that of a human head, covered with a dark veil, through which glared with livid and demonic fire, eyes that froze the marrow of his bones.
I am the Dweller of the Threshold. Get off my threshold!
The Dweller crawls nearer and nearer to Glyndon.
What wouldst thou with me? Silent? Dost thou fear me? Am I not thy beloved? Kiss me, my mortal lover.
Glyndon keels over unconscious, unable to pass the Dweller's test.
Gotcha.
The danger of the Chevalier's elementaries parallels exactly the danger of the Dweller, and the Chevalier's near death when he loses von Marx and subsequent haunting by von Marx mirrors Glyndon's failure with the Dweller, who subsequently haunts him up and down Europe, killing his relatives and making his life a living hell. But with the death of Blanche in Ghostland and the death of Zanoni in Bulwer-Lytton's novel, the tragic couple cannot live happily ever after. In the vast library of 19th century romantic novels, we'd be able to find other books with similar events, but taken together, they seem at least slightly more than coincidental. At the very least, they help to reveal a strong melodramatic flair in the Chevalier's purportedly true-to-life memoir, which suggests a pretty heavy use of artistic license. If Britten is willing to draw on a work of fiction to create Ghostland, is it possible she could have made the entire thing up? What do you guys think? Is this Ghostland something you're willing to swallow?
Well,
We've got adepts projecting teenager spirits across Europe. We've got black magicians controlling people's bodies, performing rituals in dark caves, right?
I think if it is true, it's like a metaphor or an allegory. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like, I don't want to get into this, but the Bible.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like, she could have, like, she might totally mean it, that, like, all of this is true, but it might not be necessarily exactly, like,
Might be
word for
exaggerated.
word true.
You're saying it's written as an epic.
Kind of, maybe. Like, it's
Epic
like,
language.
maybe it's more of, like, truth in that the meaning of it is
What you
true.
take from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Bible. Like, you know, I mean, you can subscribe to the Bible being, like, everything legitimately happened, but
You
not
can also just
necessarily
take, like,
everyone.
lessons
Yeah, a
from
lot of
it.
people just take it as, like, an overarching lesson.
Zanoni and Ghostland both kind of stem from the same counterculture of like this 1850s, 1870s time period. And I mean, it seems like this kind of thing was happening a lot in Europe and near Asia and America, where we can find these kinds of paranormal accounts
Yeah.
where that's what people are looking for. It's like, we want more of that. Let's write it.
So what if these events aren't so fantastic after all? What if they really happened to somebody? And what if that somebody was Emma Harding Britten herself?
Yo!
What if the character of the Chevalier is an amalgamation of the most significant elements of her life experiences, her most honest convictions about the metaphysics of this world and the spirit world, and her lifelong research into the most persuasive manifestations of occult phenomena throughout the world? It's just like James is talking about. This stuff is happening in all sorts of different places. It's just not necessarily happening to her. Since we began, we've seen parallels between Britten's experiences and opinions and what the Chevalier recorded in Ghostland and Art Magic. But now, we're going to go all in and see if we can prove that the Chevalier can be none other than his editor, Emma Harding Britten. Secret occult brotherhoods really did exist in Europe in the 19th century, this subculture James mentioned. Britten belonged to a secretive occult circle in her youth, attended by Edward Buller-Lytton. At this circle, she practiced astral projection to other distant circles around Europe by sending out her double.
She told me of one case when the London body wished to send a message to an associated body in Vienna. She was given this message, left her physical body, and appeared to the group in Vienna in her astral body, was recognized by them, delivered her message, and received their answer. Then returning to London, took possession of her physical body and delivered the answer.
Britten explained the principle of the double, also called an apparition or spirit of the living, in a series of newspaper articles going as far back as 1860. She said that the life principles, which was the spiritual body, has not only been felt and heard, but there are cases on record where the double has moved objects, as well as conversing intelligently. She said there are even some cases in which a strongly magnetic person with a considerable amount of psychological power can send that spirit body forth at will. But this is fairly rare, and these powers are exceptional, and generally the result of culture and repeated experiment. Britten herself, just like the Chevalier, was capable of creating this doppelganger. She told John Lovell all about it, which he recorded into his historical account of the founders of the Theosophical Society. And the story of Helene Laval, using black magic in service of her obsession with the Chevalier, directly parallels her experience with the Customs House officer John Gallagher we talked about last episode. John Gallagher became obsessed with her after watching her perform a lecture, as you'll recall. A medium and another man claiming to be an Indian adept put Gallagher on a special diet and taught him what Britten calls abominable voodoo arts, which allowed his spirit to leave his body and follow Britten wherever in the world she might be. John Gallagher, in her autobiography, is using the help of who?
Indian voodoo.
An Indian,
practitioners,
some sort of Indian adept. And Helene Laval is working in a cavern with... Jacob's making this face. Like it's all coming together.
It is.
An Indian assistant.
Yeah.
Right? In the cavern. So both of them have these Indian assistants.
Was it the same guy, do you think?
Maybe
this is his career.
That's not the...
Seems unlikely, but possible. But there's a connection to be made there. Lust, right? Helene Laval lusts. It's not real love. John Gallagher lusts. It's not real love.
It's a crush, yeah.
And astral projection in both cases. Helene Laval astrally projects. John Gallagher astrally projects.
In the same
Why
kind
does
of way.
I guess... So she refers to as, like, this astral projection of her spirit or her doppelganger as an apparition.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I guess that throws me off, because usually apparition is, like, actually someone that's dead, right?
But in this case, she's an apparition of the living. If you have a spirit that will survive you after death, then she says you can send it out.
A spirit that... Okay, see, now I'm trying to mix it with the other guy and his theories.
Right. Blending is a little bit, but it's a similar
Yeah.
concept, right? That because we have spirits that separate from our bodies on death, we can send them out and use them
But only if you're, like, at a
separate from our
certain...
body. Yeah, you have to train to be able to accomplish it. Then there's the Chevalier's doctrine of submundane or elementary spirits, nature spirits who existed below human spirits on a divine hierarchy, which he articulated in depth in Art, Magic, and Ghostland. According to the Chevalier, these can be controlled by occult adepts and manipulated according to the adept's commands. Britten publicly declared her belief in elementals months before. Remember this?
Yes.
So when she described that encounter with kobolds. She witnessed them, but she went a step further, arguing in favor of the Chevalier that these beings could be controlled by an occultist. She also professed belief in the primacy of sun worship as the original purest form of religion. A full 16 years before the Chevalier would do it. In 1860, she gave a series of lectures published that same year. The first one addressed the topic of astronomical religion. She said, "We stand upon the very threshold of time itself, and there we find that the very first, the earliest systems that ever prevailed upon earth were the worship of the powers of nature. The earth, the tree, the plant, the fruit, these were his means of subsistence. To cultivate these, we must observe time and season. The ancients began to perceive that the wondrous, majestic sun was the source of the light and heat and warmth which produces fertility." So, because of the round of the seasons, worship developed around the round of the seasons, which then centered on the sun, the
Paganism.
movement, right? Yeah, paganism, basically.
Yeah.
The movement and placement of the sun in relation to earth determines the seasons, determine the rounds of the day, and so the sun god, the reborn god, is all the same thing.
And the Chevalier believed with, like, the, not necessarily horoscopes, but the connection of that impacting us, right?
Yeah, and he
did,
believed that
right?
Jesus of Nazareth, or the sort of biblical version of Jesus of Nazareth as a reborn God, was inspired by the earlier form of sun worship, a God who is reborn every day when the day begins.
Very pagan.
This is not to say that everything in Art, Magic, and Ghostland comes directly from Britten's life experience. She toured around Scotland, but it's difficult to pin down any record of a Scottish village experiencing a mass possession in the 1850s, right? But there is the case of Mortsine, which we talked about in our Elemental episode, where there was an actual possession of a whole village, and this was a case she knew about. Not only is it mentioned in Ghostland, it's also fully detailed in her book 19th Century Miracles. However, the same can't be said for India. Emma Harding Britten never visited India. She was a world traveler. She lectured in the US, Canada, England, Scotland, and Australia, but she never went to Asia, or at least there's no record of her ever having done that. If Britten is the Chevalier, where do these Indian stories come from? The first clue can be found slightly to the left of the Chevalier's oeuvre in Helena Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled. Illustrating the concept of Indian Akasa, Blavatsky tells of a fakir, F-A-K-I-R, channeling Akashic energy into a plant.
The fakir, coming to the help of nature with his powerful will and spirit purified from the contact with matter, condenses, so to speak, the essence of plant life into its germ and forces it to maturity ahead of its time.
The Chevalier uses the same example in art magic.
If that small twig placed in the earth is fed and irrigated by the akasa which men and spirits pour out upon its vast abundance, then it waits not the process of nature, but springs up at once, shoots flowers, bears seeds, and dies all within the hour, instead of within the month, as the slower growth of nature would have ordered.
The Chevalier does not mention where he gleaned this information about the power of Akasa, but guess what? Helena Blavatsky does. Good old Helena. She names Louis Jacqueliot, a French national living in India, author of a series of books about Indian culture, including Occult Science in India, published as, say it all with me, Le spiritisme dans le monde, l'initiation et les sciences occultes dans l'Inde et chez tous les peuples de l'Antiquité. L'Antiquité.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Antiquité.
Yeah.
Antiquité.
Croissant.
The French came to India around the same time as the British for the same motives. The British East India Company had its French counterpart in the Compagnie, and both had a presence in India, although Britain's United Kingdom's was considerably larger and stronger. Well, that brings us to today's brief history.
Lovely. A brief history of India and the West. India's first exchange with the West was Alexander the Great's failed invasion of the Punjab in 327 BCE.
Can never invade the Punjab.
Rule number 1 of life.
Right, don't try to invade the Punjab.
The trek was so grueling that he turned back at the Ganges, having made very little impact on Indian culture. The Portuguese arrived around 1500, and the treasures they brought back from the subcontinent inspired English and Dutch and eventually French merchants to begin traveling to India. The steady trickle of Indian artifacts and texts started to filter into Europe from the trade wars taking place into the 18th and 19th centuries, building up to the British colonial occupation of the subcontinent.
Yeah, Britain really won that one. They got out ahead and they ended up being the main colonizers of India.
Interest in Indian culture and religion began to pick up steam in the West through the second half of the 19th century, particularly with the publication of Max Muller's
Muller, sure.
50-volume translation of Sacred Books of the East. Then at the World's Parliament of Religions held in Chicago in 1893. Is that a thing still?
I don't think so, but
Can we bring it back?
We can try.
Sweet.
We're announcing the next World's Parliament of Religions
Hosted by
here on Maryland's Eastern Shore.
the Secret Society.
Hosted by the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors.
Yep.
So Hatha Yoga was introduced at this World's Parliament, Chicago, 1893.
Yep. A modernized Vedic tradition, utilizing physical positions to aid in meditative concentration.
It's a pretty modern idea. And the whole idea of yogic meditation really is to quiet your body so that you can focus and meditate. So it's about your body not getting in the way, like, if you have gas or something. It's to quiet your body and its discomfort so that you can focus mentally to
I wish I
elevate
could do
your
that
state.
whenever I'm just hungry.
It helps.
Yeah, so it's not just about white ladies having tighter butts.
I don't know if
That's
I
why I
believe
go to
you.
yoga
And
class.
monks having tighter butts.
Don't forget.
That's a brief history of India and the West.
Yep, that was it.
Very
Thanks,
nice.
guys.
Very brief this time. I appreciate you keeping it brief.
Yeah, I've been working on it.
During a several-month stay in Benares in Bengal, also known as Varanasi, Jacqueliot met a fakir named Konvindasamy, who was visiting Benares to perform funeral rites on the banks of the Ganges for a wealthy Hindu. So if you were rich enough in India, you could pay a yogi or a fakir to perform all your necessary ritual ablutions after you have died.
I gotta start saving up.
To get your ablutions done properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to mess around with that.
Whole different fund.
So while he was there, during his 3 weeks of ablutions in honor of the dead, he would swing by and visit Jacqueliot. And when he would come by, Jacoliot would say, "Can you do some fancy for me, some occult stuff?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, I can."
Like I do when I come to your house.
Right, yeah. I'm like, "Hey, Olivia, can you do something fancy?"
Well, I'll see what I got.
So Convindasamy levitated. He moved furniture and water through his magnetic influence.
At the same time?
Separately.
Like, oh.
What do you imagine? Like a glass of water
Like,
on top of a...
I imagine this man just, like, suddenly using, like, airbending powers to just, like, shoot, like, a couch, but also a couch surrounded by a tunnel of water, like, through walls.
Would that impress anyone here?
That would impress me.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
impressed just thinking about it.
That seems cooler.
It's a really badass image in my head.
I think he like if you had a bowl of water, he could create a whirlpool in the water.
That's not what I'm going to do at your house next time.
And he caused plants to grow in a shortened space of time, just like the fakirs mentioned in Isis unveiled in Art Magic.
That's very nice.
He then planted the seed in the earth, which is now in a state of liquid mud. Thrusting his 7-knotted stick, I'd been waiting a couple of hours, and the sun was fast sinking below the horizon, when a low sigh startled me. Removing the muslin that hid the flower pot, he then pointed out to me a young stalk of papau, fresh and green, nearly 8 inches high.
Jacoliot mentions that the fakir's magic, F-A-K-I-R', resembles the spontaneous vegetation practiced by Tibetan lamas and detailed in the travel journals of another man, the French Catholic missionary Évariste Régis Houck.
I love his name.
Houck's 2-volume Souvenir d'un voyage dans la Tartarie, le Tibet et la Chine pendant les années 1844-1845 et 1846. Published in 1850 and translated into English as Travels in Tartary, Tibet, and China in 1851. Could have just done that second one, probably.
Yeah.
Tells stories of barbarous and diabolical ceremonies performed by the Tibetan lamas he encountered on his journey. Houck's story is remarkably similar to the one Britten recorded in Art Magic. You'll remember from a couple episodes back. The story the Chevalier told of the lama who, after fasting and preparing for several days, disemboweled himself. He's surrounded by chanting fakirs.
In a few minutes, the gesticulations of the fakirs increased almost to frenzy. Meantime, their monotonous chant rose into shrieks and yells so frightful that the ears of the listeners were deafened and their senses distracted by the clamor. And just as the tempest of horrible cries and distortions was at its height, the Lama seized the long, glittering knife which he had laid across his knees and drew it rapidly up the length of the abdomen.
The fakirs, F-A-K-I-R-S, interrogated the Lama while he held his guts in his arms. He put himself back together, and then he wiped the blood off, and it was over. Writing about his travels across China and Tibet 20 years earlier, Évariste Houck described how his party came across a large pilgrimage working its way toward the city of Rosh Chirin in China. He stopped an old man carrying a heavy pack and offered to put the man's pack on his camel. The grateful old man explained that everyone was going to Rosh Chirin to see a remarkable manifestation that would be performed by one of the many itinerant lamas wandering Tartary.
A lama was to cut himself open, take out his entrails, and place them before him, and then resume his previous condition. As the recitation of the prayer proceeds, you see the bhakti trembling in every limb and gradually working himself up into frantic convulsions. The lamas themselves become excited, then voices are raised. Their song observes no order and at last becomes a mere confusion of yelling and outcry. Then the bhakti suddenly throws aside his scarf which envelops him, unfastens his girdle, and seizing the sacred knife, slits open his stomach in one long cut.
Ew.
And then he puts himself back together again like it never happened.
So gross.
Could Houck and the Chevalier have been at the same performance? Is that even possible?
No.
Right.
Well, I guess no.
Unless he was doing the astral projection.
If one had no idea where they were and thought that Tibet was India.
I mean,
Christopher Columbus discovering America thought it was India.
True. A lot of places look like India.
But I feel like in this time they probably would have known where they were. You know.
I agree. In the 19th century, they would have known where they were.
Yep.
It looks like Britain just wholesale took these stories out of Jacoliot and out of Évariste Houck, and put them right into Ghostland. She didn't have to travel to India. She just had to read those books.
wow.
I think that's what.
I'm surprised she never went to India after. She's obviously
She's a big
invested
fan,
in
right?
it. Yeah.
Probably, she was drawing on India in particular because of this theory of sun worship. India was older religiously, right? So its religious traditions would have been older. And the Indians, the fact that they have these occult practices validate the Europeans' occult practices. Oh, look, the things the Europeans are doing are the same as the Indians, and the Indians are more ancient. So it is a sort of authorization for the European practice. It makes
Like
it seem more real.
validation?
Yeah, it validates it. So the question that lingers for us is why Britten would do this. Why would she make up a Chevalier and pull these various experiences, ideas, and research phenomena together into one narrative? Why take a bit from Zanoni, a bit from Evariste Hook, a bit from her life, and create this one bizarre, two bizarre books?
Were all the things that she took from fairly successful?
I mean, not necessarily. Some were more obscure than others.
I guess I'm just wondering because it would make sense if they were less well known that she would take from them.
Otherwise, people would notice.
Right.
It all comes back to Britten's first year in America and the strange and mysterious story of how she became one of the 19th century's most famous spiritualist mediums. Emma Harding Britten did not officially recognize her mediumistic abilities until she came to America and fell in with the fairly new spiritualist circles percolating in New York in the mid-1850s. By her own account, she was reluctant to transition from a career in acting to a career in mediumship. An acquaintance at the boarding house she was living in with her mother took her to her first seance on Canal Street, and she responded very badly to what she witnessed there.
One of the party, who seemed to have been engaged in writing something, said, speaking in a clear, loud tone, "The spirit answer, immortality, would be mere fiction were there no other evidence other than Bible teaching. This was enough for me. These horrid ghost-like looking infidels were pitching into the Bible. I ran away."
So, weirdly, in 1856, she has problems with the spirits not perfectly aligning with Christian dogma.
That's weird.
Yeah. Do we believe Britten was ever a good Bible-thumping Christian?
No.
Is anyone ever?
Right. In 1860, she's speaking specifically against Christianity as the one true religion, right? Yeah. An actor friend, Mr. Fenno, convinced her to try one more seance and brought her to see another medium, Ada Foy, also on Canal Street. Unwilling to believe the rapping was real, she looked for the springs causing the tapping sounds under the table by turning the table over, searching the floorboards, and investigating her own chair. Unable to find any natural explanation for the sounds, she started to communicate with them and to believe in them. And Foy told Britten that she could be a great medium herself. Britten's mother was reluctant to allow this change in career.
Yeah, I see that.
Until they experimented with table tilting in their own apartment.
Oh, okay.
And her success making the table move and tap finally persuaded her mother to let her become a medium.
That's like me being like, "Hey, Mom, I'm gonna do a ritual in our living room," and her being like, "Oh, cool, I'm good with this."
She's
now.
like, "Just prove you can do it, then you
Yeah,
can."
Right,
yeah.
but after the ritual, not before.
Oh,
You would have
yes,
done the ritual,
yes,
and your
yes.
mom would be like, "That was an awesome ritual.
Yeah.
You should do this.
You should do this for a living."
Wow, dreams.
I wish.
I hope my mom is not listening to this.
So this story in and of itself is not, I hope she is, and that she considers giving to our Patreon. The seance was a popular entertainment in the 1850s, and many mediums discovered their hidden talent for spirit communication soon after being exposed to the possibility. And parents responded variously to their children's gifts. Trance medium Cora Scott Richmond's parents embraced her abilities, but physical medium Daniel Douglas Hume's relatives threw him out of the house, believing he was trafficking with the devil.
Yikes.
What makes the story strange, if not fishy, is that, as you recall, as we were just talking about, this wasn't her first encounter with supernatural forces. In the same autobiography, finished and published by her sister after her death, she alluded to, but never detailed, her membership in a secret society of occultists before she left England for America, right? Channeling these elementals.
Wait, so her sister finished her?
She did finish her autobiography,
Do you think
yeah.
she could have taken things out?
I mean, anything's possible. But if she did take it out, she didn't take everything out, because there are references in the autobiography to her time with the occultists, just very brief.
Mm-hmm.
In 1860, she mentioned 1,000 weird peculiarities from my youth, which she saw now in the clear light of spiritual impression, but made no specific mention of the Orphic Society or occult experimentation before coming to New York. But she appears in Ghostland as the mirror-gazing clairvoyant for the Orphic Circle. The Chevalier says that this episode took place 20 years before he sat down to write Ghostland, the first chapters of which were published in 1872, which means that Britten was gazing on elemental demons and celestial angels no more than 3 years before she was appalled and scandalized by the spirits on Canal Street. It's possible she recanted her involvement with the Orphic Circle and recommitted herself to strict Protestantism, but crazy unlikely.
I don't know how you come back from that.
Ghostland is, in large part, the story of the Chevalier overcoming the conviction among Europe's various occult circles in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany that the soul was not eternal. In her autobiography, Britten says that the Orphic Circle told her explicitly there were no such things as spirits, only elementaries and angels. They said that the apparitions that they saw in the human shape were nothing more than shades, resulting from the custom of earthly interments instead of cremation. Cremation, this is interesting fun fact, occult fact. According to the early, the 19th century occultists, these circles, cremation actually burns up your astral body along with your physical body.
Oh.
So...
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, you don't have an eternal soul, according to these early occult circles. You only have an astral body, and that's what's being projected out and doing all these occult things. So when we cremate you, that astral body is gone right away. So they tended to throw in with cremation. That seemed like a good plan to them, because the alternative is that your astral body would sort of hover above your body and slowly decay along with your body. So if a medium went to a cemetery, all they would see is all these decaying astral bodies.
So if they cremate you, then there's just nothing.
Right.
Which is better than there being your astral.
Because that's it. There is a supernatural component to you, but it's just your astral body. It's not your soul. There is no soul, according to these early occult circles.
Wait, is that why Henry Olcott was so excited about cremation?
Maybe so. We can imagine that Britten ran from the seance, figuring it was more of the same occultist atheism. In her detailed history of the spiritualist movement, she claimed to have been an occult hierophant earlier in her life. She actually used the word hierophant, which is my title. But that she had moved beyond the folly and superstition of these misguided circles. But if she only converted to spiritualism because it replaced the Orphic Circle's elementals and angels with the eternal souls of the dead, here's a question. Why, in the mid-1870s, did she join the Theosophical Society with Henry Olcott and Helena Blavatsky, an organization with widely publicized occult belief in elemental spirits? And why on earth did she publish 900 pages of occultism in 1876 under the name Chevalier Louis de B? It makes no sense.
This woman is so confusing.
In the possibly fabricated image of a young Emma Hardinge rushing down the stairs to escape the blasphemous pronouncements of spirits communicating from beyond the grave, the whole secret of Ghostland's narrative begins to come unraveled. No worries, Olivia.
Thank you.
At last, we can learn the truth behind the Chevalier and the origins of the American occult. Ghostland is, in large part, the story of the Chevalier overcoming the conviction among Europe's various occult circles in the UK and France and Germany that the soul was not eternal. In her autobiography, Britten said that the Orphic Circle had told her explicitly there were no such things as immortal spirits, only elementary spirits, angels, and these astral bodies. Given her lifelong commitment to spiritualism after 1855, and she was considered perhaps the most adamant apologist for spiritualism, period. She almost literally wore herself out, touring around, giving trance lectures, and advocating for spiritualism. It's clear that she disagreed with British occultists' disbelief in the immortality of the soul. She was all in with spiritualist belief in the eternal soul. Spiritualists brought that eternal soul back into the picture, but it couldn't fully encapsulate the way she understood the spiritual dimensions of the universe. The soul is what she was missing with the Orphic Circle, but once she had it back, she didn't see any reason to dismiss the existence of elementary or celestial spirits, all of the supernatural ideas she'd learned as an occultist. But Britain's spiritualist community wasn't willing to accept her unique blend of occultism and spiritualism.
That was amazing, Rob.
Thanks.
We behold the illumination of Emma Hardinge Britten's vigorous, imaginative intellect. White magic is presented
The subscribers
in all
to Art
its heavenly
Magic, in
whiteness,
our
and
opinion,
black
have been
magic is
completely and
portrayed in
successfully
all the
victimized.
lurid blackness
Paste,
of its
post, and
alleged
scissors have been
infernal
most
We are not agreed with
recovery of
injudicious
this craft known as
promises
Tyro and
revelation
what the book
of
pretends to
mundane,
discourse
super
about
mundane, and
possibility
would have made a better
sub-mundane
book.
spiritualism is the beginning of a secret campaign against American spiritualism by that mighty demonic power the Jesuit order.
In her posthumously published autobiography, Britten glossed over her experiments with the Orphic Circle in a paragraph. She made no mention of the Chevalier, she made no mention of the book she published under his name, or her work with the Theosophists in the 1870s. But 6 years earlier, in the second volume of Ghostland, the second volume, so we talked about the first volume, she published a second volume in her monthly publication, The Unseen Universe. And she was doing that in roughly 1890, thereabouts.
So how far apart was the first volume published from the second?
We're looking at about 15 years have passed since the last time she's written as the Chevalier. So she writes the 2 books in 1876, and we don't see him again until the 1890s.
That seems a little like, hey, I'm telling the truth. Look at me.
Right, because the second volume is about the Chevalier coming to America.
Yeah, it's a little sketchy.
The Chevalier meets Emma Harding Britten, recognizes her as a clairvoyant he had first met working with the Orphic Circle in England, and they reunite in America and travel together to seances among the rich and the poor. On his journey, he finds confirmation for his elementary spirits among Native Americans along the Mississippi River, who profess to believe in many beings intermediate between animals, birds, and men, who are waiting to be born as men. Right? The evolutionary scheme of elementals, who will be reborn as men one day. And they found occasion to repeat the assertion that God is the ever-existent central sun of being. The Chevalier even said that he was privileged to include Mrs. Harding Britten as among his associates in the schools of occultism. Not spiritualism, occultism, in the present tense. She is among my associates. Even at the end of her career, Britten would only allow the Chevalier to confidently label her an occultist. In her autobiography, right, she creates distance from occultism. But in this, the Chevalier's book, he calls her an occultist right now.
It would give her more, like, credibility. I feel
Right. And then she wouldn't have to say it herself, I guess is what the Chevalier is saying it for her.
Because Rosicrucians don't say they're Rosicrucians. Right. Occultists don't say they're occultists.
She created the Chevalier to speak her truth, free from the confines of the responsibilities she understood to be part of her role as a spiritualist medium, a role that the public had assigned to her. In her last issue of The Unseen Universe, her penultimate writing project before embarking on the autobiography she would not finish in her lifetime, she spoke to the changing nature of supernatural belief in the Western world and the place she saw for herself in this subculture.
The chief tendency of the public work in the spiritualism of today is to drag down the cause to the level of the rank and file of the people, rather than to aim at lifting it up and elevating the popular mind to appreciation of a movement so noble that it once solves one of the greatest problems of the ages, namely the unity of science and religion.
In 21st century America, it's difficult not to sympathize with a woman who sought the highest reaches of otherworldly wisdom, but fell short in her ability to convey it to a hostile, doctrinaire mass untrusting of experts of any kind, right? This is, right, so much of America today. While this understanding may have proved a thankless task, too much for Britten to shoulder by herself, she still believed in the absolute value of sharing the truth as she saw it, as widely as possible, on the chance that it might elevate some lost soul seeking God, on that hard and often desolate trek that is our cosmic journey.
It is demonstrable that thought is contagious, traverses the air, and even without the projection of will or intention, can influence susceptible individuals, captivate the fancy of whole nations, and determine the nature of public opinion.
That thoughts are things, tangible, real, and the source alike of all the pain or pleasure man can ever know, must be an accepted axiom to every reflective mind.
Educate the soul in the purest emotions, the noblest aspirations, and the deeds and thoughts of universal kindness. Train the mind to research into the depths of nature,
to reach into the depths of nature, the schools of
art,
art, and the laws of science.
Fit the body by
temperance and use in every available direction. And earth life work is done.
I hereby adjourn and declare closed this meeting of the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors until such time as we get together and do it again.
All right, so this is it for our series on Emma Harding Britten, the Chevalier, Ghostland, and the American Occultists.
Woo!
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride.
So, very important, if you've been enjoying our podcast, that you take the time to subscribe, because we are going to take a few weeks off now before we come back. Take about 2 weeks off, I think.
Yeah.
And when we come back, we are going to begin our series on Lady Magic.
Lady Magic!
So we're going to be answering the question, what is it that connects the supernatural to womankind? We're going to be looking at the stories of Marie Laveau, Joan of Arc, some medieval witchcraft. Victoria Woodhull is going to get an episode, Maggie Fox, and come all the way up to poltergeist phenomena in the 20th century.
I am so excited.
So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter.
Yes, that is @podcast, then in all caps, Occult. And then you can also find us on Facebook by just searching at Occult Confessions, and then our website is occultconfessions.com.
And if you've enjoyed this series, please jump over to Patreon, and you can give us $1 a month. We're not looking for much to support our efforts here. It does take about 40 hours to produce an episode.
Yep.
I think a few extra hours for this series. But we would appreciate your help there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so today we had Brandon Walls reading as the Chevalier Louis de B. And throughout this series, he's done an excellent job reading our Chevalier part, our biggest role, I think, of the series.
I would say so.
Had Savannah Verrett doing Emma Hardinge Britten. Mm-hmm. We also had our friends, our discussants gathered around us here. Morgan Jung.
It's been fun.
Neat. James Kaplanges. He bowed.
Yeah.
To you, our listeners.
This is a podcast, James.
And Jacob Wheatley.
Put my Instagram out there.
You're going to plug yourself?
Jacob Wheatley has an Instagram he'd like you to follow.
At JKI Wheatley, WHEATLEY. Thank you.
Because I guess he's not coming back for the next series.
Oh, no, I just like attention.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Again, Occult Confessions is copyrighted by Audac Theater Group, LLC. We look forward to seeing you for our next series on Lady Magic.